Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Diversity in Tech Leaders podcast with me, Jess Sutcliffe, here at Coltech. As you know, there's a number of reasons, if you're listening in anyway, I have started this podcast. I want to get some leaders within the tech industry on board to share their views on why diversity, equity, and inclusion is so important to the industry and what we can do more of to make sure that we're providing those inclusive environments for those that are underrepresented within the tech space. We actually haven't had a viewpoint from the DEI team standpoint yet. So I'm really excited about today's podcast because we have Erick Smith joining us today, who is a senior manager of diversity, equity, and inclusion at Stash. He's had a wealth of experience in the DEI space, and I'm sure he's going to add some great knowledge and information to the podcast. So thank you so much for joining us, Erick. I'll leave the floor to you to introduce yourself and give a bit of information about you and what you're doing over at Stash, because I'm sure you'll do a far better job at it than I can.
No, that was great, Jessica, and thanks for having me. So Erick Smith, I lead diversity, equity, and inclusion at Stash. Stash is a fintech company, and our mission is to help everyday Americans build wealth. We have over 2 million customers that have saved 3 billion on our platform. So through my work, I ensure that people feel from day one that they can bring their true, authentic self to work at Stash through different programs that we have. Um, and what we find is that if they're able to do that, bring their true authentic self, that benefit will be felt by our customers, and it has been felt by our customers. And people in the industry, hopefully they take that away too as well. But yeah, a little bit about me, a little bit about Stash. And happy to kind of jump in.
Amazing, lovely. Well, thank you again for joining. I think, this is going to be a really interesting podcast, and you've got sort of a similar background to me-ish, and I'm excited to talk about recruitment a bit further down the schedule. But just jumping on that then, can you give us a bit of background on your journey into the DEI space?
Yeah, so like you said, just like yourself, being from the recruiting background. So yeah, so I originally started in talent acquisition at a pretty big tech company in Boston. For the audience sake, I'm located in Providence, Rhode Island. Um, so the company was around for 30 plus years and was not the most diverse place to work for. There were two things that caught my attention and led me into the DEI space. The first thing was the fact that a company was trying to get into newer technologies, and without a diverse employee base, they might not succeed in that pursuit. The second thing, and probably the most important one, was a personal one to myself. Like I said, I joined the company and, I made great friends that first year, 2 years, but what I was seeing was, friends leaving the company, right, for various reasons. And I was kind of tired of seeing those friends leaving the company. And when I say those friends identified with the underrepresented groups who I support now. And I always ask them, why are you leaving? Or why is it that, you don't feel like you can, do good work here? And the biggest reason for them was I just didn't feel included in, what was happening. I didn't feel heard. So at the time, we didn't have a formal DEI program. So myself, and I do want to give kudos to a few others because I don't want to just put it on myself, but we kind of gathered around and say, listen, what can we do to make this a place where we feel like we're included, but also help and support the business? So, we spearheaded a Black ERG there, as well as help others get off the ground. So, when I started there at that previous company, we had around 5 employee resource groups around that time. When I ended up leaving, we had 13, right? So we really built it up from that aspect. We really leaned into how we could shift that feeling of inclusion within the organization. So back then and still now, storytelling was something I identified early on as a way to bring those people closer, regardless of your background. I mean, storytelling has been around for years just to bring people close and to have them identify, similarities as well as differences, right? And where they can kind of go from there. So whether you're hearing from an underrepresented employee around their experience or the vulnerability of an executive, kind of acknowledging that they need to do better in regards to DEI, it really shifted that culture for the better. And I always go back and talk to previous employees, and they always say, hey, listen, like I started here, in terms of where they're at now. Won many awards, win everything like that, but taking that success, within that company, I moved full time into DEI for that company. And then from there, I didn't really look back, right? And now I'm at Stash, doing it full time, and the work is very near and dear to me. But yeah, that's kind of my journey in a long-winded way of how I got into to DEI. I guess the biggest thing is I didn't go to school for it, right? It kind of
Yeah.
came naturally within a specific organization, and that passion grew, and went from there. So.
Amazing. Well, yeah, no, thank you for sharing. And I think what you were saying there about the storytelling side of things, because DEI is so delicate. I think all it takes is one person to open up about their experience and coming across authentic, especially if you're a leader that might not necessarily come from a background that is underrepresented. That willingness to learn and show that
Yeah,
you're actually there for people and want to be able to create an environment where people can thrive and come to work and not actually have to worry about, what hairstyle you come in, what food you're bringing
yeah,
into work, or anything else. You can literally just come in and do your work, which essentially is what
yeah,
work is for, right? Is
yeah.
so, so important. So as somebody who specializes in the DEI space now, what would you say are some of the biggest challenges for you personally facing versus companies as a whole?
Yeah, so yeah, I had to think about this a little bit there, but I think personally for me, some of those challenges, and maybe not just exclusive to me, I think other DI practitioners can agree on, is just the emotional aspect of the job, right? So storytelling is amazing, and I love it, and I love to hear people's experience. But sometimes, if not most times, that vulnerability that someone shares with you kind of gets to you, right? Like the
Yeah.
world can be so cruel, yet somebody, personally overcomes that and is here today in these roles that we talk about. And, it's a great and inspiring story, but it pulls at you and emotionally, right? And again, when you're in this job, you have to be an emotional person because again, you have to make sure you get there, but as practitioner, it can wear on you, right? And it's something where it's like it's a double-edged sword. Like I want to hear your vulnerabilities, but I also, in the back of my mind, is like, geez, like this is really hard, and I really empathize with you, and kind of go from there. So it's really super important to have self-care, working in the
Yeah.
space, right? To make sure you check in with yourself, to make sure that you're doing the work and seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, knowing that these stories are inspiring other people and getting to the next level is great. And from there, but you also got to check in with yourself, right? Important work, but you got to be very careful because you can definitely burn out. There were some times in the past where I felt like, okay, like this is a little bit too much, but that self care is something that you definitely need to lean into. I always have things outside of work, that I tap into to make sure I don't lose myself. Now I'm farther along where some of those stories don't get to me as much as it did, but it still does, right? And it's still frustrating to hear that because again, it's like, hey, we're in 2022 right now. How are we still hearing this? How are we still going through this? But yeah, personally, that emotional aspect and just kind of tapping into that self care is something where um, I'm still doing today, right? And I still face today.
Amazing. 100% I can relate to that. I mean, um, for those that are listening that don't actually know, in my previous company, I actually sort of began, again, with a few other colleagues, began the DEI initiative. And it was around the time of the George Floyd incident. And like you were saying, it does come, you start learning about things to be able to increase your knowledge, to be able to share those events and, the stories with other people in the company. And it does. I went from watching, like, I know this is kind of off topic, but I went from watching like crime dramas like every day to
Hmm.
watching like crappy TV shows because I just couldn't take in any
Yeah,
more
yeah,
negativity.
sure, yeah,
And I've gone from like watching, because I've volunteered with the Innocence Project before. I was super big on like Child 4 and Making a Murder, all those kind of documentaries. And then I went from watching those and trying to educate myself on like injustice in the criminal justice system to watching, like, I don't know, Keeping Up with the Kardashians vibes, do you know?
yeah.
So
Yeah, I
I
mean,
was
you
like,
you need that. You definitely need that. Like for me, it's just staying physically active too as well, and just being around friends outside of the industry, right? Like just going back to your
yeah,
roots and doing things like that. Because again, it's great work. You're doing amazing work, but it's like you can't come home and then all of a sudden you're looking listening at
yeah.
stuff. You're going down your feed. You're seeing all this type of stuff. It's tough, but I mean, I mean, you're doing a good job at obviously knowing what can help you out from that aspect.
Yeah, exactly. And just on the latter part of that question, because I obviously companies, I mean, it will differ from company to company what they find challenging in terms of DEI, whether that's a startup and they don't really know where to begin, or companies that have already set, that status quo in place, and they're struggling to potentially break those already set structures. What would you say are the biggest challenges that companies face when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Yeah, companies themselves, I think everybody has their initial rah-rah moment, right?
Yeah.
Very recently in 2020, the George Floyd murder was the rah-rah moment for a lot of companies, right? The hey, like we need to start caring about this, we need to start doing this. And it's great. And I don't want to diminish the fact that people responded to an event and they're pushing their companies forward towards the DEI aspect of things. However, the challenge that you're asking me about is that consistency, right?
Yeah.
So now it's 2022, and if we go back and look at some of those companies who, um, made those initial commitments, like a lot of them their commitments aren't there, or they haven't followed through on those commitments. They put out these big commitments around, demographics, around we want to
Hmm.
donate to these things, we want to do that, and those like really short time things, right? And it's not fair to people who join these companies with the initial thing, like, oh, like this company really cares about it,
Hmm.
and then a few years down the road, the company doesn't show it. I mean, again, like we're seeing an industry that's shifting, and obviously the market's constricting when it comes to jobs in general, but like a
Hmm.
lot of those people who were initially a part of those original conversations, they don't have a job anymore, right? Because
Yeah.
again, there's no emphasis on the consistency of it. I love the fact that Stash, we keep consistent, right? It may not be rah rah moments every year, every month, whatever, but the consistency is there. Leaders are bought
Hmm.
in every single day towards it. Which again, it's a blessing for me to be in my position that I'm in, but it's a challenge for other companies to continue that, right? And to say, how can we tie this back to value, right? How can we tie this back to customers, right? And a lot of people just kind of put it on the wind, and unfortunately, I'm sure there'll be another rah rah moment that happens, and there'll be another cycle that happens, right? I mean, we saw it with Ferguson, I think that was in 2016. We saw it with George Floyd in 2020. Hopefully, we don't see it again, but I mean, the way the cycle goes, it goes from there. But that consistency is the challenge that I see a lot of companies go through. And you can't have something that goes for 1 or 2 years and expect it to be fruitful, right? It has to be something that happens for years and years and years. Google's diversity program has been around for forever, right? And you see the benefits of it. But yeah, that's the biggest challenge that I see from a company standpoint, just that consistency after that initial commitment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I actually posted something on LinkedIn the other day about because obviously we've got all these layoffs and recessions and all this horrible stuff happening in the industry at
Hmm.
the minute. Um, and you hear companies DEI is the first thing that gets cut,
Yeah.
or one of the first things that gets discussed of, well, we could put that to aside. And I came across this article which like main reasons as to why not to, and one of them was, it takes years and years and a lot of time and effort, resources to build up a DEI initiative where it's actually relayed within your company. It builds that culture
Yeah.
to your employees, which essentially is, your most valuable asset to the
Yeah.
company, you know. And not only that, but realistically, how big is the DEI budget? Is that actually going to
Hmm.
make much of an impact? It's far more probably impactful to get rid of one initiatives or programs that you can quickly recreate once you need them back. But
Yeah.
DEI is something that staff retention, you know, difference in ideas, all those things add up to essentially more revenue at the end of the day. I always like to ask people this question because everyone has different answers. But in your opinion, why would you say it's so important to create diverse and inclusive workforces?
Yeah, yeah, and maybe tie back to that last answer. But there's a few reasons. So obviously, the data out there, you can go on Google and look at McKinsey, Gartner, everything like that, shows that diverse workforces outperform organizations that lack diversity, right? So better decision making, better innovation, higher retention, like you mentioned, from a retention rate, are all very important benefits of diversity. I think one of the reasons that we are exploring now is how creating that diverse and inclusive workforce impacts the customers, right? So
Hmm.
revenue and the like. So, like again, imagine thinking you're building a product that customers from all demographics can use and benefit from, but the data that's showing you that you are not actually doing that, and you're excluding some of those demographics. And the first thing you got to do is look at your employee base, right? Is there a demographic that you're lacking internally that's showing up externally, right? So let's say, and I don't want to continue to use a fintech or space, but say you want to build a product that helps everyone, but you're seeing that women are not signing up for that product, right? I'm sure if you look inside your organization, you're going to have a lack of diversity when it comes to women, right? And
Yeah,
from there, like that's why it is so important to have that. Now, I'm not saying it has to be parity, it has to be 50-50, it has to be anything like that. But when it comes to some of those decisions around shipping products, around marketing, around just even your brand itself, you need somebody in there with different points of views so you can hit those people from different points of views. That's why I think it's extremely important. It's not, again, I do think it's a feel good thing, right? Like,
yeah,
say, like we should be inclusive. We need to be inclusive. You should have the same opportunities that I have, and we all should have an equitable experience. but it's also like a business standpoint too as well. Like you could just end up not getting the revenue that you think you're going to get because you're excluding people, right?
Yeah.
And to eliminate that catastrophe, you need to have a diverse and inclusive workplace from there. So I think not just in the fintech industry, but companies in general are realizing that if I'm a user and I'm looking at to sign up for a product, I'm going to want to see that it's a product for me. And the only
Yeah.
way I can see that is that people are building that product for me, right? And the best way to do that is to have someone who's like me building that product. So yeah, that's kind of some of the ways I think it's really important to build that workforce.
Exactly. And like you were saying, these all definitely do need to be at decision making level as well. The leaders in companies that are making these decisions that are essentially affecting not only the workforce, but your customers that are using whatever platform that you've built. I was actually speaking to somebody the other day. I won't name names or companies, but
Yeah.
she was saying, but she was saying that she actually left her current company. She fell pregnant and she actually left the company at 6 months to join a different company because the maternity policy wasn't great.
Mm,
Now
yeah.
after she left, they actually changed the policy. But I just
Crazy.
said, out of interest, who sits on that decision making level, and she just said there was white men. There's not one woman, there's not one person of color, it's
Hmm.
just white men making those decisions. And it's something that I always say this. I only know what it's like to work as a woman at Coltech. That will
Hmm.
be my only experience. That's all I can add in value because I don't know what it's like to work as somebody who's black at Coltech or a guy at Coltech or somebody who's part of the LGBTQ plus community because I don't identify with those particular groups. I'm not part of
Sure.
those groups. And it doesn't mean to say that my voice isn't valuable, but it definitely is. But the more voices that you've got and
Hmm.
experiences, people are going to be able to listen and come up with, oh, well, this is an idea, but actually, have you thought about this? Because that actually might
Yeah.
negatively impact a certain community.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, 100%. And like you said, essentially, these results mean more revenue at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Who doesn't like more revenue, right?
exactly, especially in this climate. Let's get some more money in
Yeah,
whilst we can.
for
Um,
sure.
and as you mentioned, and this is a very interesting topic to me because as a recruiter, we always get a horrible reputation, like a
Yeah.
horrible reputation. And some people treat you with respect, some people don't so much. But as you mentioned earlier in your career, you were actually part of the recruitment industry, worked in the talent acquisition teams. How have you found having that experience has benefited your current role that you're in right now?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things. I think the first one is, yeah, recruiters get a bad rap. I don't know why. Because being on both
We're
sides,
annoying.
I don't. Yeah, but we're. I mean, I would say persistent, right? Because we want to help the company, and obviously helping the company is helping the culture, right? To bring in talented people, but we also want to help that person too as well, because we know, like, hey, we're representing the company, and we know you're going to do a better job over here. I think the personal interactions that kind of come from that, right? So you're talking to a candidate, or you're talking to a hiring manager, or you're talking to a leader. You know, able to switch those really helps when it comes to being a DEI person, right? Because you're meeting people where they are, right? So again, that biggest takeaway for me is understanding everyone requires a different experience, right? Not an equal experience. Not like I treat you as I treat somebody else. Like no, like I treat you how you should be treated or how you want to be treated. An equitable experience when it comes to joining the company. So one candidate might be a new professional in the industry, while another candidate might be a parent of three, right? And it's something like how you're meeting that person where they are. Like I'm not going to schedule a parent at 3 call at 6 p.m. Right? If they say, hey, I can't really make this because I have a kid, I'm not going to pound that in and do that. I'm going to give you equitable
Yeah,
experience. What time works for you, right? Understanding that to truly provide that equitable experience and meet people where they are, it goes beyond the job title, it goes beyond the resume, but you really dive into the person, right? That's how DEI is too, as well. Like, it's not just, oh, this person does this person identifies as this. It's like, what really makes you tick? What makes you successful? How can I meet you where you are? As a, let's say, take Canada out the way, let's take a leader, right? A leader wants to get into DEI. How can I meet them where they are? Right. To say, okay, this is what we want to do from here. It's not going to be the same thing as somebody who's totally embedded into DEI. They know all the stuff like that. So creating those equitable experiences in recruiting has helped me in DEI, and also just talking to people, right? Like
yeah,
you can't be a recruiter and not being able to talk to people and not being able to take your lumps, right? I think that's the biggest thing too as well. Early on in my DEI journey, I took a lot of lumps because I was at a company where in the beginning it was a lot of hand holding, a lot of,
Mhm.
hey, why are we doing this? A lot of, hey, like this doesn't make any sense. We don't need to do this. And in reality, like we needed to do it, right? And it took a lot of those lumps, a lot of those, downfalls to kind of be like, all right, like next play, next step,
Yeah.
right? Or in our case, next candidate, right? Next role, next whatever like that. And then all of a sudden, like you build momentum, right? And that momentum turns into a culture shift, or that momentum turns into, hey, I got 5, 6, 7, 8 candidates hired, but you're always going to take your lumps. So it built that muscle there too as well. So there's a lot of different things that, from a recruiting standpoint, is happening in my space right now. Yeah, it's some of the best experience that I've received, being a recruiter, and maybe when I ride off to the sunset, I'll start my own recruiting company. But right now it's like that experience has helped me with DEI and still helps me to this day. Outside of the, obviously, okay, let's bring in diverse talent. Let's go to diverse, organizations. Let's talk like, yeah, that's like the easy answer. The real answer is like just dealing with the people,
Yeah.
and being able to meet people where they are.
100%. I think, that ability, because everybody, especially in the tech space as well, you get some people that have super outgoing personalities, and then you do get some that you might answer the phone. You're like, "Oh, hi, how was your week?" "Yeah, it was good," and that's like the end of
Yeah,
the conversation.
yeah,
And being
yeah,
able to carry on that conversation with somebody is something that
for sure.
is invaluable. And like you were saying, like the resilience as well. Oh my gosh, the lumps that you get in recruitment.
Yeah,
Sometimes I feel like I'm going to have 5 mental breakdowns in one week, every day of the
yeah,
week, really. So, and especially if you're, like you're saying, sometimes the DEI side of things is a lot of hand holding. You've got to be able to meet people where they are, and that might not be where ideally you or the business want them to be.
right.
But that patience and that resilience to be able to build that up is, invaluable. And obviously, when it comes to DEI, diversity, like the metrics around, how many women you've got in the business or other underrepresented groups, is a lot easier to measure than the equity and inclusion side. What have you found is a good way to measure inclusion, and what advice would you give to businesses that are hoping to create that side of things and measure it a little bit more accurately?
Yeah, that's a great question. And like you mentioned, a lot of times companies put a huge emphasis on bringing in diverse talent, which is great. And I don't want to diminish that, because, like we said, diverse talent, they drive that innovation, they drive that better decision making, but they stop there, right?
Yeah.
And in terms of goals and metrics, and oftentimes when they focus on just that diversity metric, they neglect that inclusion aspect of it. And this is detrimental to any culture, right? Because without that feeling of inclusion, your company will turn to that revolving door, right? And make
Yeah.
your job even harder, right? You're going to continue to find that talent to kind of bring in, and it's going to be a leaky bucket, right? Because they don't feel like they're included. But to know if somebody feels like they're included, you have to measure that, right? And you have to put an emphasis on it. So I give you my personal example at Stash. We place a huge emphasis on inclusion, right? We have our employee resource groups, which we'll go into a little bit later. We have our leaders involved. We do different things around it, but we also measure just how we're doing, right? So for us, we have a biannual inclusion index that goes along with our biannual employee survey. The inclusion index, 7-question survey, with embedded into that survey that measures our ability to foster an inclusive work environment. So it measures things like psychological safety, trust, belonging, just to name a few things. So we're able just to see how well we're doing or what areas need to improve on, right? And then we can make action plans around it from that aspect. So for other organizations, it doesn't have to be a specific inclusion index, but I think businesses should prioritize hearing their employees' feedback, right, around just
Yeah.
how they're doing, right? Not just the, hey, we brought this diverse group in, or we have 20% people who identify as this, hooray, right? Like, no, like, how do the 20% feel, right?
Yeah.
How are they feeling about your efforts? How are they feeling like they're included? And then from a attrition standpoint, like, where's the bucket? Where's the bucket? Where's the hole in the bucket, per se? That's kind of what we do. But I do think companies in general need to find ways to measure that, right, and take action on it, and put it in their, we use OKRs over here at Stash, but putting it into their goals, and as a company, right, and spotlighting that and making sure it's front and center for people to understand, like, hey, this is an important thing to do.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, it, I mean, in some previous companies that I've worked in have definitely done that. And what can be really frustrating, because what people don't want to do is create these kind of, you know, feedback forms, and then people get them and nothing, you don't really hear anything about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I actually said in one of mine, obviously they're all anonymous, I actually said in one
Yeah.
of mine, like, respond to the feedback that we're given, because we were given this
Hmm.
feedback twice a year, take it in 30 minutes out of our day, and we've got targets to hit, we've got this to hit, that to hit. This isn't at this
Yeah.
company, by the way, this company's great.
Yeah.
But in terms of that, and there was no acknowledgement that would even what we'd suggested. And if they weren't actually making a decision to change and implement things that people were suggesting, and you speak internally, really, don't you, about, oh, I actually suggested this or this.
Hmm. Hmm.
There was multiple things that people were bringing up, and it was just, there was like no addressing of it.
Yeah.
um so being able to address it, even if it's something that you are going to be working on in the background, but it might not necessarily happen straight away, because again, DEI takes such a long time
Yeah.
to build. Is
Yeah.
something that I think all employees value, that transparency and honesty in the process,
Yeah.
and having that open communication and normalizing the conversation around DEI is so valuable within a company as well.
Yeah. For sure. For sure.
Yeah, and then obviously you mentioned about ERGs, which is obviously a huge part of the inclusivity within a company. A lot of companies start them, and it always tends to be somebody, quite understandably, from an underrepresented community that begins them, because obviously they've got
Yeah.
that lived experience. They can do the storytelling, like you mentioned. What level of importance would you say ERGs have to companies, and what benefits have you seen come from them?
Yeah. So I wouldn't be where I am today without, and I think I've been truly blessed with some great employee resource groups, and both places that I've done this with. I really think DEI doesn't really go that far without those groups. They're really the backbone of successful, inclusive culture. They play a huge part in giving a voice to people who historically may not have been giving that voice in the organization, right? So you take somebody who could be, for example, let's say an associate at a company, right? And they've never been given the opportunity to speak in front of a few people, right? And maybe be 10, maybe 20, maybe all hands, maybe the entire company. These groups, they give those people those opportunities. But also another big benefit is, we see from ERGs are developing that leadership skills for individuals who may not be able to manage a team on a day-to-day basis. Like I said, for an associate standpoint, again, you may be an individual contributor in your, regular, day-to-day work, but for ERG, maybe you're a leader of the ERG of, 30 people, right? And these 30 people look to you, right? And you have to manage that, and you have to do that. It's no easy task, right? I think I made a joke the other day. I'd rather lead a team and a day-to-day thing than lead an ERG, because
Hmm.
first off, it's such an emotional tasking thing,
Yeah.
but you still have to meet people where they are within the ERG. There's a lot of intersectionality that goes on, right? So you have to
Yeah.
understand those interpersonal skills, but you're also driving them towards a common goal, right? And all my ERG leaders, and I definitely want to boast about this. All my ERG leaders, they end up doing bigger and better things, whether within the company or outside the company, because they build that skill. And to anybody who's on this call thinking about creating ERG, thinking about joining ERG, thinking about managing ERG, please do. It's skills and experiences that you can't really get anywhere else, right?
Yeah.
And the second thing about that, if you're doing that, put it in your resume, put it on your LinkedIn, do it from there, because people understand, if you've been around long enough, people understand just how impactful that is and just how much goes into it, because you're picking up another job, right? And just to put it out there, like, it's another job to do to lead an ERG if your company really cares about DEI, right? If it's just like,
Yeah.
oh, we just have ERGs and they just throw parties and company events, but no, if your ERG is really thriving and pushing the culture forward, it's there. But like, yeah, leadership skills that gets built, as well as retention, right? If I'm a part of this group, I'm gonna be less likely to leave, because again, this group's supporting me. This group is supporting my career growth. This group's supporting the itch I have to show up and be myself. Like, sometimes you go to some of these meetings, they're playing music that you want to listen to. Like, okay, like, all right,
Yeah.
now I feel I just came from a meeting that was a 2-hour meeting, and I come to this ERG meeting, and we're gonna have our goals, we're gonna have our mission, but there's music that I would listen to on a day-to-day basis, and we're gonna still do this. Like, I feel a part of that. And then just to see people on the outside getting involved too as well, that's the second part, right? Like, how people engage with the ERG, how people engage with learning. It's really very beneficial. And it really sucks to see some companies not embrace those ERGs or not even, come about them and support them, because it really helps out when it comes to, they're going to be your biggest ambassadors internally, they're going to be your biggest ambassadors externally, and it will help, a lot of headaches that you may experience as a business from a DEI aspect.
Exactly. And I think people don't realize even how little things make such a big difference. Like you're talking when you go to these events and like music's being played that you enjoy.
Yeah.
It's something that sounds so ridiculous, but it
Yeah,
makes such a
it's so
huge
it's so
impact.
small, but it's like, hey, listen, like this is energizing me for the rest of my day because I know this community here that say things hit the fan, and I need somebody to leverage, and I need somebody to talk to who may share the same experience as me. You can do that, right? It's not like it's excluding everybody else, but like sometimes you want your comfort, and sometimes you want to
Yeah.
be able to talk things out with somebody who identifies with the group, no like judgment free, and they have your back. Like it's definitely a huge benefit in that.
Yeah. And what advice, because obviously I imagine there's probably people listening to this that, potentially want to start an employee resource group, don't know how to go about it. What advice would you give to them that are wanting to create something like that?
Yeah, so in the virtual world, it's very tough.
Yeah.
But in terms of, again, you could be in a fully fledged DEI organization, or even one that's really just starting out. It's really just to start, right? It's really just to, hey, like I'm very passionate about this. Go around and see if you can find some champions within certain teams, certain whatever, and obviously, you want to identify people who really care about it and leverage them to start off with. And then from there, that ball will continue to roll downhill, and you gather more speed there. In a virtual setting, maybe it's like, hey, somebody raised their hand in all hands, or somebody raised their hand in a company wide thing to say, hey, I used to do this at this company, used to do it at that company, and collaborate with them, right? And start from there. And then from there, you kind of go from there. Obviously, if it's a in person company, it's very easy to walk down the hall and be like, hey, like, you want to grab lunch? Like we kind of look like we have the similar things from that aspect,
Yeah.
and go from there. Virtually is tough, but it's really just starting with a few people. And if you start with a
Yeah.
few people, that snowball down the hill will continue to build, and you kind of go from there.
100%, absolutely. I think a lot of people will probably be scared to just do it, but my advice would
Yeah.
just do it. Ask the question. The worst they're going to say is, well, they're probably not going to say no because that would
Yeah.
be rude.
That would be crazy. That'd be crazy if they're like, "Oh no, we don't want to do this,"
Yeah.
and then you know where you'll stand in the company,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
and maybe
Yeah,
it's not the best company for you. So
exactly. And obviously at Stash, you're driving a lot of impact internally to help underrepresented people, and I imagine also outside of the company as well. But can you just give us a bit more insight of what you are doing to drive the impact for underrepresented folks, both within the company and also outside of the company as well?
yeah. So day-to-day role, I work tirelessly. Like I work a good amount to make sure those folks who are underrepresented at the company, have that voice and feel supported within the organization. I'm very proud of the role, the work that goes on internally, and super proud of the progress that we made. And we still have a lot more progress to go. I don't want to sound like we're in this perfect state and we have all our ducks in a row. Like DEI is an ever evolving thing, but it's good to sometimes you just hear from certain people saying, hey, like you really gave me a voice, right? And I really came from a company where I didn't have a voice, and now I'm coming to a company that I have a voice, right? And it may not be like I'm driving the entire strategy of the company, but my voice is heard when I say, hey, we should probably do this, we should probably do that, or oh, like I'm seeing this is affecting this. Sometimes it's all people need, it just to feel like they're heard, right? And that's kind of what I'm helping people do, is getting those opportunities to be heard within the company, getting those opportunities for people to build those leadership skills within the company. I think your next question was outside the company. So outside the company, I mentor a few people, around the careers, underrepresented people around the careers. But I also extend myself, doing things like this, and I hop on, other podcasts, and do different events to help people like of underrepresented background just get into the tech or the fintech industry, right? And this is more of a generational thing, right? We all know, and again, I'm sure your listeners know, there's no elephant in the room, that tech, fintech, any type of tech will pay more than most industries, besides obviously doctors, nurses, and everything like that. So
Yeah.
definitely want to include that in there. But in terms of this industry, it pays more, right? And it's able to help you shift generational wealth when it comes to that, right? You can shift entire generations just by starting in a tech company. And that may seem, and again, I hope people aren't laughing at that, but you can, right? It starts with
Yeah.
one person. And if I'm able to help more people see the value and getting into, fintech companies and starting there, getting stocks and doing everything like that, like, that's good on my part, right? And that's good on their part too as well, because they can shift an entire generation. They can shift everything from their family. They can be the one in their family to do that. And I really try to help, those people kind of get into the industry and go from there. So that's kind of how I help, externally.
Yeah, and it happens quick as well. I don't think
Oh
people
yeah.
who aren't in, I didn't realize until sort of I'd got integrated into the tech industry. You seeing people who've had like 4 or 5 years experience heading into
Hmm.
management or already in management, looking for like
Yeah.
$200,000 salaries with
Yeah. Oh yeah.
RSUs. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm definitely in the wrong business. I'm going to learn to code.
Yeah, right. I say
um,
that every day. I say it every day.
yeah, and then I don't do it. But yeah, so it's something that, like you said, it can create. There's so much potential to create that generational wealth, and especially somebody from an underrepresented background. If you're hesitant on it, or you're searching for a career where, and essentially, tech is only going to grow and improve and change from
Yeah.
here. That is that is going to be the future. I always wonder, like how, like my grandma, she absolutely has no idea how to use a phone. And I always
Yeah.
think, what am I not going to know how to use in like 50
Yeah.
years time?
Yeah. It's pretty crazy.
I
Yeah. I don't
know.
know.
Do you know what I mean? So, yeah, it's forever changing. It's something that 100% people should get involved in. And like I said, I've considered it myself, and I think I'd be able to find my job, a job easy enough as well. I shouldn't be saying this on the podcast at work, but never mind. Um,
Yeah, but it's not. But it's also not just the actual tech part of it, but also just
yeah,
working for a tech company in general. You get benefits from
yeah,
that. You don't have to know how to code, but just getting in the industry and getting your foot in the door. And maybe you do want to code at some point, right? But just getting your foot in the door, whether it's HR, whether it's finance, whether it's anything like that. Traditionally, these industries pay a lot better than other industries, and I think people will get more worth out of that.
absolutely. And obviously, in this podcast so far, we've spoken an awful lot about DI and everybody else, but we've not
Yeah.
spoken about you much, Eric. So, what are your plans
Okay.
for the future?
Yeah, yeah, no, that's a great question. So I think my biggest thing, I just want to continue to make an impact on not just myself, my family, but everyone I can. Um, Not just in the DEI space, but just in life in general. No, I'm a selfless person by nature, and maybe calling myself a selfless person may not be a selfless thing to do, but I consider myself a selfless person because I really truly love to have people be successful around me. I want to continue to be able to, you know, help people, whether it's people I know personally, a random connection that reached out on LinkedIn. You reached out to me, randomly, and I definitely wanted to help out any way that I can, and I think this is very impactful work, and I know you're helping out people too as well. And I want to continue to do that. I truly live, and it's funny and it's really quirky. And again, you can edit this out, but if you look at my LinkedIn headline, it is in my job title. It's not in the field that I work in. It literally says changing lives every day. And I
Yeah,
truly believe that I want to do that every single day. And I want to continue to live that way, right? Whether it's, in DEI, whether say somehow I get into finance or I get into being an executive. Like that's what I want my job title to be forever, or that's what I want people to know me for forever. That I'm really changing lives every day. That's the future, right? That's the
yeah.
past, present, future, in either capacity. Just as long as I'm making that impact, I'm all happy.
Absolutely. I don't think people realize as well how much impact just one person can make. It can
Yeah,
seem overwhelming, the pressure to be able to just and have no idea where to start. But once you've made that first step, it's amazing
yeah,
how fast it just, the trajectory goes up. And I've definitely felt it even in terms of, running this Brave Behind Bars program with the Educational Justice at
hmm,
MIT, everything to be able to, help people, even just a simple thank you makes such a difference. Like you've
yeah. Oh
actually
yeah,
made a difference to my life, or even, they might not have got the job, but, thank you for, pushing back or sticking up for this part
yeah,
of it. The process
hmm,
wasn't as inclusive it should be. I've definitely valued my principles and values over clients, before, and I will continue to do that because essentially
that's
I wouldn't
awesome.
be running sort of like, recruitment's very much you need to get work and you need to place jobs and blah blah blah. But
Yeah,
I'm lucky enough to have a company that supports, you should stick with your values, otherwise they're not values.
hmm,
So I've, unfortunately had to cut a few clients, but that's just
yeah,
that's the job. And I don't want to place people in companies that aren't inclusive. So yeah, well, that concludes the podcast. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, Eric, and I know we're
Yeah,
literally
of
on the dot
course.
now.
No,
But thank you
anytime.
so much for joining. If you had one final message to leave everyone who's listening, what would that be?
Yeah. Just try to make an impact wherever you go. Like that's all it is. That's really that's really it, right? If you're able to do that, success will continue to follow you.
Amazing, lovely. Well, thank you so much again for joining. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure.
And if I'm sure, well, correct me if I'm wrong, but if anyone wants to reach out on advice around DEI, I'm sure you'd be happy to answer a few questions.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Perfect, amazing. Well, thanks again.